Tenerife tragedy, giants colliding behind the mist. On a March day in 1977, fog had settled over Los Rodeos Airport. Visibility was nearly zero. Pilots were trying to communicate with the tower, each attempting to safely navigate their aircraft. However, this invisible danger was setting the stage for the world's deadliest aviation disaster. KLM Captain J, relying on years of experience, was confident. But this time, things were different. The fog, radio communication failures, and human error were driving them toward an irreversible point. As the Pan Am pilots advanced on the runway, they noticed the lights of the KLM aircraft emerging swiftly from the mist. Everything happened in seconds. A scream, explosion sounds, and then a deep silence. 583 people bid farewell to the sky that day. Immediately after the disaster, the shocked airport personnel, looking around in panic, alerted the first aid teams. The fog was so dense that the smoke from the fire was often not visible. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue teams quickly sprang into action, but the weather conditions made everything more difficult. Slowly moving vehicles were disappearing into the fog as they tried to send emergency help. Many of the rescue teams, initially panicked, had difficulty coordinating. Only brave pilots, medical staff, and airport employees remained. But there was something that kept everyone together, something that made them continue fighting for survival: hope. As the rescue teams navigated through the flames and fog, they reached a group of severely injured passengers. Some rescuers risked their own lives to lift the wreckage of the planes to carry injured passengers to safety. They were racing against time. Every second was precious. Many of the wounded were struggling to breathe due to oxygen deprivation, and they were being poisoned by the toxic smoke rising in the air. It wasn't enough to simply be brave. As the night wore on, the weather conditions worsened. Many vehicles were lost in the fog and couldn't find their way. Even a few rescue helicopters had to turn back due to the dense fog. Yet the teams, holding on to each other and not losing hope, continued to guide one another. Sometimes, a rescuer would shout to encourage another, point to a direction, and eventually, the path would be found. At the same time, military units were called into action. Despite the poor visibility, other teams slowly started arriving at the scene. Nearby hospitals were also receiving constant transfers of the injured by a group of volunteer medical teams. They were focused on saving the survivors, not counting the dead. Many of the rescue workers were carefully looking through the wreckage, hoping to find signs that some passengers had survived. However, some of the workers were emotionally and physically affected by the bodies they found. As the night progressed, the fog began to lift a little. This allowed the rescue teams to work more effectively. The survivors pulled from the wreckage were quickly transported to hospitals. While many survived, they faced severe burns and broken bones. The scale of the disaster was measured not just by the number of dead, but by the psychological trauma experienced by the survivors. Rescue teams came together immediately after the disaster to analyze the mistakes that had caused the event. The fog had been more than just a natural obstacle. It represented a convergence of communication failures and human errors. This tragedy marked a turning point in aviation history. Many airlines and aviation authorities reviewed their safety procedures, and radical changes were made at airports worldwide. The Tenerife tragedy was not just an air disaster. It became a lesson remembered around the world, both in the aviation industry and in society, demonstrating the preciousness of human life and the consequences of human error.